But I haven't. Okay, we're live actually. Let me roll
All
the
right,
intro.
roll that intro.
All right. Okay, we are back to our screen. I'm still setting my stuff up since I have formatted my computer and reorganized things. It was just time for some fresh start. Every now and then, you got to do those things. Some a video is actually coming up regarding that, but today we've got Ted here again. Today's topic was bound to be the AEC and Tech news. I want to welcome everybody who's going to be watching this on record as well as watching real time. And we have several things that we want to kind of cover over this session, just kind of geek out, nerd out, however you want to put it. And because Ted himself is an enthusiast for tech as well, we're just gonna take it away, I guess. We got a couple of topics. I know you're still working on some of the topics that you want to cover today, but do you want to start? Is there a few things that
Yeah.
you want to take away with?
Um, Man, there's so many different topics we can talk about today. You definitely kind of got me thinking earlier. So we can start this one of two ways. We can go into new releases because there's a few. I mean, between Lumion 11.5 that got released a little bit ago, D5 1.9. There's also the current Blender release. Lots of cool stuff. So we could go that way, or we can go maybe a little bit hardware. Um,
Let's touch software a bit.
yeah. All right.
I think we get to geek out about hardware enough that maybe we just start off with softwares and then we go into the hardware afterwards.
Sounds good to me. So Lumion 11.5 got released,
Yeah,
I guess about a week and a half ago. Do you want me to
yes,
share my screen? I've got a bunch of these links up already.
please go ahead.
Awesome. So let me share. Boom. There we
Now,
go.
we have discussed this a bit ago, but the strengths and weaknesses when it comes to pros and cons of these different type of softwares that we use daily, and we want to cover what's been sort of the latest stuff and what's available to us as a tool, and that's why we just kind of want to cover these sort of latest things that are available to us. Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so Lumion 11. So here's my take on software in general. Use what you know, use what works best for the use case, and let the project dictate the software you use. If you can afford to buy a license to multiple pieces of software, it makes sense to buy multiple pieces of software because time is important. I mean, the old adage, time is money. And Lumion does some really great things. Enscape does some really great things. 3ds Max does some really great things. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but I'm going to preface this with that before we go into any specific software, just because all of these things kind of have their own strengths and weaknesses and tend to work well um, for some things and not others. Now with Lumion 11, it was a good release when it came out. I'm not a huge fan of the most recent release. I think 11.5 came out with a handful of things. Let's see, some new objects, characters, And let's see, what else do we have? I'm not really sure that there's much else in this release. It's pretty okay. That's incremental.
I mean, it is
Um,
incremental
yeah.
release. It's not
So
one of the major ones.
yeah, I don't know
Actually,
how often I'm using retro uh assets though. So I don't know.
I mean, sometimes you don't necessarily want to dress up your room with the most brand spanking new stuff, and some nostalgic type of nuance is always appreciated. But
Yeah.
just going back to, let's roll back to the version 11. Is that something that was kind of different to you when it first launched?
No. So here's my thing with Lumion right now, and I think they did a really great job going from Lumion 8 to Lumion 9. And then Lumion 9, 10, and 11 all have really great little features that they've added, but nothing substantial between each iteration that I see as being really valuable. So, like Lumion 11 has the new staging tool that you're seeing here, where you can do some really intricate animations, and that is great. I really like that. But is that a reason for me to upgrade? Not really.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's
Others
especially
maybe,
because
but
they have what is it, perpetual license over
yeah,
subscription, so makes it a little bit more considerate of
yep,
somebody if you are trying to jump a major release from, let's say, version 8 to 9. Every time
yeah.
you've got to coop up that large sum of money, not to mention the overall price, that becomes sort of the discussion point, and you need to be able to somehow these new features that are in the new releases to justify the amount of price that you need to pay for. Of course, it is cheaper than buying a brand new license. You do have to just pay the upgrade
Here we go.
fee, but
Yeah,
you have to pay
yeah.
the upgrade fee rather than a yeah.
Yeah, so I've got, let's see, I've got Lumion 11 Pro, so it would cost me $1,000 or €1,000 to upgrade. So that comes out to I think like 11 or $1,200 for me. So is that feature worth 11 to $1,200 for me? Not necessarily. Now, in another year, if I'm upgrading from Lumion 9 to Lumion 11. So that would be kind of the upgrade path in another, whenever they release Lumion 12, let's say. So I'm in Lumion 10 Pro right now. Let's say I do an upgrade to 12 whenever it comes out, 12 Pro. I'm probably looking at €2,500, which is almost buying a full license of Lumion. So that's also something to take into consideration when you're jumping from um, 3 iterations back to the current version. So,
Right,
you know,
and also they release every year. So meaning if you have been
roughly, yeah.
keeping up, then it probably means that you're about 500 euros every year is what you're expecting to pay as you try to take those new features. One of the things that I did like, however, is the modern UI on Lumion 11, if I'm not mistaken. The interface was kind of, I'd say, a bit more touched up. I think when it was, dating back to when it was first sort of released, and the UI just kind of stayed the same. But right now, the UI's been touched up, and if it's entirely subjective, but I prefer the current UI over what it used to be.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. I do like the new orthographic view stuff. That's kind of nice. But as far as their new user interface, that's really, it's a nice to have. I don't particularly like their UI in general, mostly because their UI is kind of in the engine. It's not separate from the tool if that makes sense. And I don't know if I'm communicating this correctly, but essentially because you're rendering the graphics on screen plus these icons and all this other stuff, it becomes very difficult to navigate when projects get bigger and
It,
bigger.
yeah, and this is all sort of running as a full screen experience. So, your sort of native playground of Windows UI with the familiar minimize, maximize, and all the shortcuts that you're used to as a Windows user is
Yeah,
kind of like not really there or not as fluid as, and you
yeah.
kind of have to get used to
It
that sort
feels
of
like you're
foreign
inside a
environment.
video game.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, but it
Yeah,
is
there's
just
pros and
something that
cons.
you have to just kind of train your muscle memory so that when you're in this environment, you gotta use different set of short keys or different type of
Hmm.
UIs or navigation system. And obviously, Lumion is meant for you to be completely fully immersed and
Yeah,
getting all of
yeah,
these kick-ass visuals
yep.
done. So it makes sense, but
They do a good job. I'll give them that, and they've built a really great product. I remember working in Lumion 6, maybe 5, many years ago, and it's so different now from what it was. It just is night and day different. So, yeah, I mean, it's good incremental update. It's not my favorite update. There's nothing that I must have. I think the Lumion 8 to 9 was probably the biggest jump because they went from being a very game engine feel to a very realistic feel, and that was an important adjustment for them. But yeah, I think nipping on their heels is probably D5 render.
all right, let's
Um,
move on
you
to
know,
that one then.
to kind of flow from one conversation to another to keep things kind of moving. I think D5, I was playing with this today. I think D5 is really, really doing some great stuff. Now, I think we talked briefly about this recently. It's built within the Unreal Engine ecosystem with their own special sauce. Um,
You can
they're
never
doing
tell until somebody spills the beans, right?
Yeah, you really can't. I mean, they're all getting so good. It's difficult. But I mean, their assets library is really nice. It feels a little clunky to work inside, even compared to Lumion. Lumion feels pretty, for lack of a better term, dummy proof. I mean, if I can use it, anybody can use it. Um, un
It's somewhere in
D5,
between that
yeah.
like completely full screen environment to
Mm-hmm.
Windows kind of windowed mode kind of UI. The UI is a little bit, I would say, a bit foreign to me. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something
It
that
takes
you
some
can.
getting used to, for
Yeah,
sure.
and like I mean, it is like that for any sort of render, so I don't really take that as granted. But it there is a bit of a learning curve that you're gonna have to
Yeah.
go through. But there also is a lot of features that are just like really, as you said, the dummy or foolproof. Something like DLSS.
Yeah.
It's not something that any other renderers, and it's such a simple thing. It just works, and it just works
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
well. And
I mean, these visuals are impressive. Like if
yeah.
I had looked at this not knowing it was D5, I would think 3ds Max.
Hmm.
Um, I would think Unreal Engine. I would think some very, very high-end professional software. Now, of course, they're trying to make you feel that way, like, oh, that's very achievable. But again, this comes back to my comment a few iterations ago, where it's that last 10% that makes all the difference. Like obviously, these guys who are doing this kind of content they know where they're going with it, and they're getting to that last 10%. But really impressive stuff. They're obviously very focused on GPU rendering, very focused on, you know, showing the quality and the speed of these elements, with the DLSS. Um, and they're really taking a good approach to, I think, material and asset libraries. They're doing a really good job of giving you the things that you typically need, and not giving you more than you need. Um,
Right.
I
And also I recently, I think it's my most recent video that I had released. I did
mhm,
a sort of a showcase of a D5 render, trying to get familiarized myself as well as just kind of showcasing what it can do and just a introduction to kind of
yeah,
series. But what I was able to gather is you can make pretty stunning visuals out of this. And again, we cannot separate pricing away from any of the tools that are
yeah,
available to us, and it is quite easily
yeah.
approachable, where you buy
I mean,
perpetual license and you are with that forever is something that is hard to say no. That's
yeah,
one aspect, and this is, I would say, something like a Bitcoin where it is sort of highly volatile, where it is all up and coming. So you can only expect this to just kind of take a steep curve in terms of development. So you can expect sort of great things rather than this has not plateaued, unlike
yeah,
some others.
yeah.
So
I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with this. I mean, it's definitely for $480 for a perpetual license on this thing. That's impressive. And even the free version, let's say, so here's my take on this. If you are an entry level artist who is trying to break into the industry, who is trying to make a little bit of money, to be able to afford more software,
we're learning.
learning, I encourage people to use legitimate software over software that is cracked. We've all been in college, but if you're trying to make money off the software that you're learning or using, having a free option that is a valid license, man. If you're trying to make some money off of your renderings, go D5 render, get the freebie, start working on, getting a client list, and after your first job or two, buy the professional license. After a few jobs in D5, if you want to, afford some more advanced software, maybe you buy something else. But
Now,
this is a really great way to get people hooked.
is free version um commercial able, because if you remember SketchUp's licensing, yeah, you had the free version and it's great for students and who's trying to do an up and coming, but are you able to make money off of it? No.
Yeah.
For SketchUp free version,
Well,
but for
so
this one, is it
this
is
one,
it
yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's no limitation to the free version other than it
like
kind
an
of
asset library?
limits the asset library, the resolution. I don't think there's animation in it. So yeah, I mean,
But why not? Why not? That still
exactly,
gets you up and going already. So that is
exactly.
totally enticing. And, the things that you can expect out of this as it develops further, I think it is
Hmm.
quite a lot of things are expected in that regard. Stuff like DLSS really is a kicker. It just simply works.
Yeah,
And something I did want to just kind of have your take on this is highly dependent on ray tracing. Therefore, you need to have a compatible card. It's something that I had also brought
yeah,
up on my
yeah.
video. So,
This
if
is
you
true.
if you don't have RTX at the in the name of your graphics card, then you're more likely to have some issues. And DLSS is NVIDIA's technology, so you've got to have NVIDIA card and also RTX suffix to your
Yeah,
name, to the name of the
that's gonna
graphics card.
be That's going to be the problem across the board with most of these applications that are real time. There are software and hardware or there are limitations to the hardware that the software is going to um, have trouble with. I mean, I really like. Sorry, somebody's having a party in my alley
Well,
all
we
of a
don't
sudden.
hear anything, so
Okay,
you
good.
can go ahead and enjoy join them.
It's just difficult to focus when somebody's blaring really bad music in your backyard. Um, Joys of living in the city.
Oh yeah.
So anyways, it's one of those things where each piece of software uses a piece of hardware. In the VFX industry, you've got, V-Ray, Octane, Redshift, Arnold, all these different rendering applications that use different hardware more or less effectively. Um, the um, the 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 problem with hardware is it ends up being very expensive and limiting on what you can and can't do. So trying to find a piece of software that opens lots of doors with very unlimiting tools is difficult. Um, it's one of those things where I think like open source software tends to do a really good job, um, opening the doors to a lot of different tools. AMD products on GPUs, NVIDIA products on GPUs, they allow both M1 chips, talking about the new ARM-based processing units versus um, the
Regular
traditional
Intel, yeah.
x86 Intel based processing. It's one of those things where you see a lot of these hardware elements being used across the board. Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely something to consider. Take a look at your hardware, take a look at your machine, and then make a decision from there on what software you end up using. It might be limiting or it might open some interesting doors. So,
Do
I
you
mean,
wanna move on to your next tab?
the next tab is going to be Enscape, but just really
I
briefly,
was gonna point Blender as well, just because
yeah,
of the
I'm just going to
pricing.
slide
You
this
have
over.
to, yeah.
Speaking of pricing, Blender 2.93 is out. And so this is kind of cool. So they've approached this in a really interesting way. They're talking about approaching it as an LTS version, which, if I remember correctly, it is a um, hold on, I have to look it up.
LTS. Isn't that an abbreviation for Linus Tech Tips show?
It is, but long-term support. So
Oh,
let me pull this down. So this is important, and this is important in software, specifically when you're dealing with um,
2 year time
projects.
span. Okay.
So essentially, what this does is because Blender's been moving so fast, they have been making some great software, but also breaking things really quickly. So what they're talking about with their um, long-term support is if you start on, let's say, Blender 2.8 in a project, they're not going to release 2.92 and break everything for you. They're going to give you support on 2.83 through the first quarter of 2022, which is important when you're on a project timeline because let's say a project lasts over the course of a year to 2 years. Well, you need support on your product over those 2 years if something is not working correctly, if something is not effective enough. If they just move on from 2.83 to 2.9 and leave you in the dust, you know, that's problematic, really problematic from a business and
API
studio.
development point of view as
Well,
well. Yeah.
API and development is important too, but if you're a studio and you're running multiple projects and 2.83 is your um, baseline, and they come out with a new product and say, okay, 2.83 is deprecated, you have to move to 2.9 to do the thing you need to do, we're not supporting you anymore, that's really problematic and detrimental to your revenue stream. As a
Talk
business owner, it's
talk
a
about
real issue.
Autodesk Revit. Like once you move up, you can't
Oh
backsave at
man,
all. Yeah.
having inoperable
Backwards compatibility.
compatibility is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. I I can rant about some Autodesk stuff, but the fact that I have to have Revit 2022 for new clients who are sending me files, but my plugins are all in 2021 and I can't pull that file into 2021, that is the biggest nightmare in the world. And the
Hmm.
client can't send me a lower version. That's the only thing they can send me. So now I'm hamstrung. It's just the worst model in the world.
Hmm. And it's not
So
like there's a huge change in the model that like it's fundamentally different where you just
yeah,
can't open. It's exactly the same thing, maybe a few parameters missing. And if so, then you gotta be able to backsave it. And
yeah. Like why is that not a thing, Autodesk? Autodesk, I'm asking you, why?
well,
Why can't I save down one version? Just give me one version so that when you upgrade and the studio upgrades with it, I'm not left in a lurch with my plugins. I'm asking you, Autodesk, please, just
and
one version.
and Autodesk becomes a unique tool of set of tools where AutoCAD and both AutoCAD, well, AutoCAD you can backsave, but any Revit user, you always end up with two, three, four, five, six different years of Revits installed
Hmm.
on your machine because you can't handle previous versions. And if you ever get a revision to any of the existing projects, then you've got to
And
open
God
it up
forbid somebody
on,
upgrades it.
yeah, on like 2 years ago year. And that's just how it is. And I've got to
It's the
have at
worst.
least 3 years worth of Revit always.
Yeah, and if your plugin hasn't been updated, like 2022 came out this year, because that
Great.
makes
I love
sense.
the features, but I can't move up.
Yeah, and clients have already moved up because that's their workflow. So now I'm left in a lurch. I can't open their files. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
God, it's frustrating. So, anyways, so long-term support, please, other companies, pick up this kind of business model. It just makes sense.
Well,
So,
Blender is really like an oddball to the whole industry, isn't it? The fact
it,
that they are just openly out there with different set of pricing.
I mean, well, different set of pricing, no pricing. It's the
Exactly.
best thing ever.
Yeah.
I
How are they making money though in terms of business? Like how are they
so
able
the
to support
way,
themselves?
as far as I understand it, they are working through business grants essentially. So, um, Epic Games and Sony and any number of large companies can become a contributor, like almost a donor to the software, and say, I will give you X number of dollars a year if you give me some very specific support, which ends up aggregating down to the rest of the community over the course of the software. And please, if anybody understands this better than I do, correct me because I know this much about how this works and I'm assuming a lot of things. So please communicate in the comments if you know better. But essentially, the way I understand it is it's being supported um, uh, by companies so that I think everybody's just tired of the SaaS model, and this is reactionary to the SaaS sort of model.
Right.
But their real-time rendering EV engine is amazing. Like it's beautiful, fast. If you got the hardware, their particle systems are pretty impressive. Again, my my business partner Austin, he's like, they don't have some things that I need, but true. Max has some better things, and there are some paid plugins that work better. But Blender is nipping at the heels of a lot of these larger companies. Um, it's and their grease pencil tools and their 3D illustration tool. It's cool stuff. Like, it's impressive, and it's free. If you want to learn something new, learn Blender, man. It's quickly becoming staple within the VFX community and just the illustration community as a whole,
It really is
or the
already
CG art community.
sort of staple.
Well, it didn't used to be, and the whole thing is like
In the recent
Blender
years.
was, yeah, Blender used to be the redheaded stepchild. I remember learning Blender 6 something or other, and it's come so far. I think the big jump was version 7 to version 8 was the big one, where they kind of changed up the way they did the interface to be a little bit more mainstream. They finally did away with the right click, left click flip thing that they did.
Hmm.
Um,
Wait,
so in
is it
old versions,
2.7 to 8? Because,
yeah,
okay,
that's the big jump.
I see, I
So
see.
2.79 to 2.8 was the big jump. That's when they changed the user interface and kind of turned everything on their head.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's really nice to see. I mean, you can edit video in it. You can draw. You can draw on 3D surfaces. So you've got some sculpting tools. You've got rigging tools. You've got pretty much everything you would want in a suite of different softwares. And
Now,
there's a
I want to say, as in, like, because I'm coming from architectural design background, whereas you're coming from VFX or architectural visualization focus. And whilst Blender kind of makes sense, can I design an architectural design inside of the
no,
bladder. That's that one thing. So
yeah,
first of all, like I can't really, do I want to invest time and actually learn it?
no.
Personally, I have not had a justification in spending my own time to learning it. It's a great tool, and I love ranges of tools that are available to us.
I
But
will say right now, if you're an architect, don't use Blender to design. That's a terrible idea.
yeah,
I
I
love
agree with that.
Blender, and it is a cool piece of software. You can do some impressive, fun things. Tony, yeah, it's a powerhouse. Um, but as a design tool, it's not necessarily a design tool. It's an artist tool. So yeah, Blender's great. If you're trying to do visualization, but as a design tool, I wouldn't worry
So,
too much about
we
it.
so far discussed about three different software or tools that are available to us. Something more mainstream architectural design piece of Lumion, but also on the other side of the spectrum in terms of pricing. And
Yep,
then D5 render is maybe in the middle ground.
yep,
Like it's not necessarily design software just yet. But
yeah,
then Blender is completely on the opposite side with the pricing and also the spectrum of like a workflow. Now let's discuss
yeah,
another one that's on the next tab of yours where you just had a page of where pricing is I would say middle ground, and
yeah,
also in terms of workflow and for architectural design piece of software, I think this is, in my opinion, best suited
yeah.
currently.
If you're trying to get into it, if you're trying to learn a piece of software, Enscape's the way to go. Just for ease of use for 3D visualization. We use it all the time in the office. You can get really impressive visuals out of it. You can also get really great uh, uh, sort of. I'm losing words at this point, so I apologize. But you can get really, really good um, iterative design,
Work in
um,
progress.
work in progress illustrations out of it. I mean, I love using the um, what is it? Their outline uh, uh, rendering style.
Yeah, it is
They're
an outline.
yeah, it's
And
like a clay model and outline. I love it.
it's just something. I can't put quite a finger.
So
It's
here's
not
a question.
sharpness. It is not sharpness. It is not resolution, but it is a style of a visual where it just really appeals to me. And
Yeah.
I have voiced this before, and I just can't really like put a word to it or grasp it, but the overall visualistic style, it is like, hey, those are great looking realistic type of images, but actually that is different to the style of render that I prefer for iterative design or conceptual design. For I want a bit more stylistic choice on top of just a
So
pure realistic type of render. I just don't think this is a good way to portray just because of
no, you
that.
should never use. You should never use. Here's my thing. It's the doorknob effect, and we've talked about this before. Don't go photoreal if you're still designing. Just don't. It's bad for business. If you are designing something, even this is a little too photoreal for me, but it's a little bit more illustrative.
It's a bit more abstract.
Yeah, it's more abstracted. You understand the room visually without um, without it going too detailed. So the doorknob effect is a perfect example. If you go too photoreal too early, the client is going to focus on something insignificant like a doorknob that is not actually spec'd. And when they focus on the doorknob that isn't actually spec'd on a project, um, you end up going through iterations of things that don't actually help the design process because the client is overly focused on something and you caused it. You brought their attention to a thing because you made a decision. Well, it's not important that that needs to be there, but I've made the decision to go photo real, so I need to show something, and the client latches on to a negative because it looks too real and too finished. The nice part of Enscape, and they don't really have anything on their website necessarily that communicates this, which is unfortunate.
Well, I
I
I
guess this is the
personally did a
closest.
whole a presentation based on conceptual rendering. That was a title of the
Hmm.
presentation that I've done. I've done that for a SketchUp conference, and there is a recording out there. If you search conceptual rendering Joseph Kim, it will probably pop up, and you can listen to my
I know that
slight
course.
jokes. And but
I've seen that.
yeah, but it's making that point, doorknob effect, or so that you don't introduce. There is a value in sort of clear visual communication where you don't introduce too much detail, or everything is like set to the stone in terms of materiality and the tone of graphics and a
Hmm.
color or material. Like, wood is a wood, brick is a brick. We don't need to discuss about the slight tone, red, yellow tone of a brick. We don't need to talk
Yeah.
about what species of wood it is. It's just atmosphere and the
Is it
environment
dark
that we
wood?
want
Is it
to
light wood?
get.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So,
those things like I highly promote, and it's especially important so that you don't spend too much wasted time in terms of design process. And I think
yep.
Enscape does that really well. However, the word realistic rendering really sells well, and I think they
Hmm.
have to do this for that reason. And I've seen just
Well, it's
way.
also important to have that.
It is, and I think, as we always say, you and I both say, it's gonna get you there. 70-80% of realism, it's gonna get you there, but the 20%, the final 10% is up to your inside of your head, where you're gonna have to fill in the gaps, and that's usually the process. Like, if you look at architectural sketches, it's never a final looking realistic thing. It is just a line that is demonstrating the spatial quality. I don't know. I'm going back to design school days,
No,
but
I know what you mean. It's the parti diagram of rendering. You don't want to go too deep into the weeds and get stuck. That's all there is to it. So you're absolutely right, and I think Enscape probably captures that best. And typically, what I do with my renderings is I will combine an Enscape illustration with a SketchUp illustration to blend the two. And that usually, like in Photoshop, I'll overlay the two and kind of paint out the parts that I want to see in, as peripheral, and then focus on the thing that I'm designing. And the great part about that is you can then draw the eye specifically to what the client needs to see and agree on early on in the process. It's funny, a lot of my project um, workload right now is owners who have reached out to us saying, I don't understand what the architect is communicating to me. Please visualize it. And that is really valuable. And Enscape is how we do those projects because um, typically, and I'll be completely blunt, architects don't always communicate visual design choices effectively because they are working in plan and
Sometimes
elevation.
technically challenged too in terms of, getting your machine to
Yeah,
work to do these sort of
there's that
visualization.
too.
But
But even
Enscape certainly has lowered that bar to like anyone to just
yes,
hit render button and then you can show it. And I think it has a tremendous amount of value in that. I must say though, here's an interesting point that I thought about the other day, and I wasn't sure like how to put to the right words, and then I wanted to just kind of discuss with you. Why do you think we are so drawn, or you and I are so drawn to those outlines? And I asked that, and I have a slight answer to that. Is because if you look at a SketchUp, if you look at Revit, all of our modeling tools are outlined. And to me, the Enscape visuals are basically a better looking demonstration of my modeling tool. And
ignore the software that we use though. Take a step even further back. Traditionally, as an architect, how are you taught? You're taught to hand draw in 2D and 3D in hard lines. It's the it's a tradition in architecture that has been ingrained in all of us as a designer. That those plans, those drawings, those um, initial lines on paper dictate depth and importance.
draws the focus.
It draws the focus, exactly. And by communicating through line work where the focus is, you communicate design intent, and that's important. And I think that's why you and I are drawn to it so vehemently. We are, um, we we understand and um, I guess resonate with those line weights. But here's the thing, the client isn't. They're not taught that way.
No, no.
So
Oh, well,
they
let
have a
me add a little
difficulty.
more thought to that. So I must mention, because whenever I kind of go a bit more technical, whenever I say the outline, I also say ambient occlusion. Do you think that has any relation to it? Like, because of the outline, I think there's a bit of, for people who doesn't know, so here is a bit of line that at the back of my wall and the ceiling, and that's a bit of poor demonstration of what ambient occlusion is, but it just outlines and it gives that definition. You can't tell the corner behind Ted's
It's
head.
essentially a contact shadow.
Right, right. But it shows, it demonstrates the geometry. Here you can tell there's a back wall, and then there's a ceiling, and then there's
Mhm.
a bit that carries forward. Whereas behind your head, the corner of the room is not demonstrated because there's no sort of a shadow line or
It's
outline,
lost.
or
Yeah.
ambient occlusion is. So by having outline, it actually gives a definition to the geometry where it just makes it look a bit more real in some way or relatable.
Oh yeah, and I think it's funny because in my more photoreal images, I usually uh, I usually turn in Enscape the line work on for interiors specifically. I set the line work to 1, maybe 2%. It's very, very subtle, but having that line work at that 1 to 2% just ends up giving you an edge to work from. And I don't always need it on or off. It's almost imperceptible to most people, but I see it and it's important. So
Tony actually in the chat brought up a
take
good
focus on.
point. He says the outlines and also ambient occlusion takes your focus away from the materials. I think that's a good point. It really does. Somehow it adds sort of people are drawn. I don't know why. There must be sort of the psychological thing, but people are drawn to sharpness. People are drawn to lines. People are drawn to where there's a sharp line between or sharp edge between something to something. And I think outline just kind of makes that. And instead of looking at the middle where the material is, I think it makes people look at the shape. People are just kind of drawn to that psychologically. I don't know why, but so I think outline just kind of does that to you. It interesting thing that I go back to V-Ray days where I actually used the Toon render to do
Yep.
outlines, and then kind of gave up trying to double up amount of materials that I have in the model. So I end up just doing regular render and then just superimpose SketchUp export images directly on top to have the outlines. And that was like my stylistic choice, and it always suited well to me. And that's the birth of my conceptual rendering days, where I kind of honed in terms of the stylistic visuals that I want to do. And then Enscape just showed up, and then like, okay, I don't have to do superimpose image or
Yeah, it's
overlay
just
of
there.
image anymore. It's just
It's like,
done right
oh,
away. Oh,
perfect.
okay, well, easy, done.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, Tony says it gives more definition. It's 100% true. It just like gives you
Adds
that little extra
sharpness.
oomph.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a strange thing, but yeah, here some of the designers or artists we are talking together and just kind of agreeing the impact of that. Well, do you want to go to the next one, Unreal Engine?
I mean, we can kind of touch on Unreal. I think this is something that everybody should keep an eye on. I know it's a game engine, but
And it is
um,
also complex to learn.
yep,
There's a high, very high, steep learning curve.
learning curve. Yep.
Personally, I haven't overcome that just yet, but
But
I'm always
man,
keeping my eye on it just because of its value.
there is some cool stuff in here though. I mean, the this right here, it might not say much to many, but this right here shows how valuable this piece of software is right now.
Is this normal map?
No, this is their essentially polymap. This is each individual color is like a polygon essentially. And in their new, I forget what they're calling it.
Isn't that normal map? Or that's what I thought.
No,
Or
so
height map. I
no,
lack of
so a normal map is specific to lighting. Um,
I've looked this up like 10 times. I still miss
let's
it.
let's find what the uh
There's a bump map,
normal
displacement
map.
map, there's a parallax
Um,
map, there's normal map, Google map.
so normal mapping. Normal mapping is a texture mapping technique used for faking lighting
Lighting.
of bump and indentation and implementation of bump. That's not a good explanation. It's more than that.
Tony says he's
Um,
curious. These are very, very confusing, at
it
least
gets real
to an
technical.
architectural designer. Yeah.
Essentially, a normal map. The way a normal map works is the colors dictate light direction, whether it is indented or bumped, so to speak. It's
Last time I looked at
let's
this
see here.
was I've resoluted to it gives you a direction of a shadow that the where the model needs to
I
receive.
mean, this stuff goes back to the old days,
Right,
1978.
but it has a spectrum of colors. This is not
Yes,
a bump map where it just light and dark. This
but that
has
spectrum of colors communicates how light is going to react with the surface too.
right. So the
So,
orientation of the surface is what it
hmm
is kind of in form with the color, which is a
yeah,
very, very confusing. Black and white is easy to understand for
yeah.
displacement and bump map, but when it
But the
gets a
other thing
normal
is,
map, it's just like this is beyond me. I can't
when
think
you
of
generate, yeah, when you start generating like a normal map pass, you can relight scenes to change the direction of lighting. It's very technical, and I'm not good at it. This is where I wish Austin was on, because he could be like, "Oh yeah, this is what a normal map is. Why are you
so
guys?"
how is this different
So
to
this
normal
is
map?
not a normal map. So each one of these is a polygon. Essentially, each one of these colors represents a polygon. And the important part about this, it
Oh.
breaks down. So these are generating levels of detail based on distance from the camera in real time.
But if it is a
So
distance to the camera, shouldn't it be a certain color when it's
yeah,
further
but
away
look,
from the
so
color?
this asset and this asset are generally the same assets, but this asset is broken up into more detail than this asset here, if that makes sense. So notice that in the background there are less color variations, and in the foreground there are more color variations, which means that the foreground has more detail than the background. It gets really, really I don't fully understand a lot of this stuff. This is done in the background, and I'm just kind of guessing how do they kind of do this. But this whole what do they call it? Temporal super resolution. Essentially, all it is a real time level of detail. So let's put it this way: in your Revit model, you have um, in a Revit model you have levels of detail. So LOD1 is less detailed than an LOD4, right? So this is a similar process. It's reversed. LOD0 is the highest quality. LOD5 is the lowest quality. But what it does is on a real-time scale, depending on how close your camera is to the object, it will manipulate what that asset is, whether it needs to be an LOD0, which is the best quality because you're right there,
Mm-hmm.
or it's an LOD5, which is it's way in the background, so it just needs to be a card, a
Right.
2D face. So that is really valuable to game designers who are generating massive worlds. Less
Where
so
it's
necessarily.
utilizing a lot of resource of your machine, so you want to focus on
Exactly.
the right spot. Obviously, Sophie's saying this is on another level. It is on another level, and I have such a hard time understanding too. So I don't really expect many people to. Maybe you're playing at the same level as Ted
I don't
here.
use this. I don't use this stuff on a regular basis.
Right.
Yes, so
But it's just
Tony's talked about V-Ray
really,
fur.
really, really impressive stuff. And, for someone who's using sort of the back end of some of these technologies that are being developed, we just have to appreciate how much of a thought and development has gone into this so that we can use these sort of gaming engine like systems or softwares in a daily basis in a very,
So
very crude way, but still good enough for us.
if so, here's my thing. The first person who takes Unreal Engine and builds a BIM system inside of it is going to make a lot of money.
I don't agree with that. No.
I do. I think if you can build a BIM system inside of Unreal Engine, if you can build a design tool inside of Unreal Engine, you are going to make a lot of money.
I think it'll be very difficult because
But
even
look
if
at
you
these.
hone out like the UIs and stuff, I mean at that point you're basically doing I don't know SimCity or
No, no,
Sim.
no, no, no. So here's my argument. Here's my argument. Listen to me, because I think this is if you can go into Unreal Engine and program a game, essentially a video game, that is Revit. Let's say you program a Revit inside of Unreal Engine. You have world building scalability for your architecture. So
But should it be the other way, where Unreal Engine lives inside of Revit, where when you click on realistic view, it
I
just
don't think
does that for you with all
I
the
don't think
parameters
it
that
should
exist
be.
on the material?
I don't think it should be because Revit is so antiquated. Revit is a spreadsheet.
True,
Revit is a glorified spreadsheet.
it
That's
is.
all it is. It has some drawing tools and some modeling tools, and that's about it. If you could take that conceptual approach to architecture where you are modeling within limits and say, inside of Unreal Engine, you draw a wall and you say that wall is a brick wall with an interior steel frame, um, whatever the construction methodology is behind whatever wall you've drawn. You can control all those parameters inside of Unreal Engine, and then on top of that, you can expand on those parameters. I'm just spitballing, and this is a concept that I've thought could work in the past. Um, but I think if you built a CAD software like a video game, it could have a lot of value, is essentially what
You
I'm
just want to
saying.
play many games,
Well, yeah, I want to be able to design my building, then run through it and destroy it at the same time. So,
right?
I saw some YouTube video a little while ago about a designer who implemented destruction elements inside of their architecture in Unreal Engine and said his clients had more fun destroying the things that he designed than they ever did in any of the design process or design meetings that they went through.
I've burned my 3D models, or sorry, I've burned actual paper models that I made in architecture school. That was just a thing. Like after finals,
Oh yeah,
you just make a campfire out of your paper and wood, the basswood models.
I don't
And
recommend the styrofoam models though.
no, no, no. But yeah, I guess that gives you same sort of joy in terms of destroying. Now, I've always imagined the days where I'm quickly modeling things up in SketchUp and then somehow shooting guns in that modeled space, playing Counter-Strike or something like that. And I don't know, just when I try to think of gaming engine with architecture, that's what I tend to think
Yeah,
about. Being able to shoot
GoldenEye.
guns and playing like Doom or something like that inside of my model.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I want that. I also want that.
There was like
So,
a April Fool's thing that Enscape had where I think it was Phil Reed who did that, but it was a April Fool's thing where you can put your watermark on Enscape and then put
and they put in,
a gun next to on the corner, and then basically you walk around and it looks like a person point of view shooting game.
well, I mean, with Unreal 5, you're going to be able to do that. So it's
A
not
bit more than
really,
that.
yeah. So, well, anyways, so I think we've gone through all the software. I
Okay.
don't, do you want to start talking hardware as well?
Yeah, sure.
Because we
I'll
only have a few minutes here, it seems like.
Yeah, we are 1 minute left on the 1 hour mark. So a few things I did want to talk about M1 chip because I think this is such a significant piece of hardware in addition to any sort of graphics card such as 30 series card that are in shortage. At least M1 chip is not in a terrible amount of shortage. It is highly popular. Apple is kind of behind all of this. So for those of you who are not aware, M1 chip is basically a CPU that Apple makes, and it does give you a tremendous amount of performance at the dollar ratio. So it's probably not going to be powerhouse, but it
Well,
is it is in some ways but in comparison it is not going to perform as well as your big fat epic Threadripper series, but it is going to hand you over a huge amount of performance in terms of dollar you put in, as well as the power or the amount of wattage that you push in. Therefore, it
yeah,
is going to perform so well. I don't know about the desktop. I still don't
I
believe in that. But for laptop or
I mean,
tablet,
yes, but here's my counter argument to that is the M1 chip is still in its infancy. I think it will grow. I believe it's built on the ARM architecture,
hmm
but ARM doesn't necessarily support a lot of the things that we as designers and architects do.
such as
Um,
Windows.
yep, x86 is kind of a problem. I it's so I grew up in the days of the split Mac and Windows.
I've used
If you had,
both.
well, no, well, I mean, we're talking about like back when you couldn't use one or the other.
Oh, I see.
Like
Yeah.
you had to use one or the other. It was either you were on a Mac or you were on a PC. And Mac had its own proprietary software and PC had its own kind of software suites. I my first computer was a Power PC 6400 Apple Macintosh with I think it was their Apple 9, 8.1, something like
That
that.
was before the animal days.
Oh, way before Animal Days. This is like
I think like
uh
first one I remember is lion or snow leopard.
no, we're talking about like Apple operating systems. Uh
Anyways, but so you don't think M1 is significant?
no, it's very significant. Yeah, this is. I'm thinking Mac OS 9 is what it was. There were no animals or locations. This is just
Number.
Apple Mac OS 9. Um, so M1 chip is valuable in the fact that its performance to watt is great, but the reality of it is not a lot of software is specifically designed to work on it yet.
Right.
So I think large scale adoption is probably 5 years out minimum.
I
10
think
years
I think
long
I
term.
differ. I think it's gonna come a lot sooner, and the reason is because it's Apple. It's got huge developer in the background, not the specific to working for Apple,
But if
but
that's the case, then why isn't there more adoption on Mac for design software? Like, why isn't Revit on Mac? Why isn't
well,
a more
was
developed version
Autodesk
of
ever
AutoCAD on Mac?
fast in adopting?
Well,
uh,
no, but my point is, even when Mac was dual operating, even when Mac was on Intel, these applications didn't necessarily try to develop for the Mac
Oh, so
OS.
you're saying Revit will never work, or it'll take 5 years for it to work on Apple. I'm on board with that. But
Yeah,
what I was
Revit
alluding
will never
to
be on
was like
Apple.
people like Adobe.
Oh yeah, I
It
think
is
for
going
if
to
you're
jump the board very quickly, and you
yes,
have no doubt that they're gonna. But I don't know it.
but
But you
Adobe
have
is also really well tied to Apple products from the get-go.
exactly. Whereas
So
Autodesk isn't, so that they're gonna take their extra time.
I
Um,
don't think they're ever going to transition to Apple after Apple switches to M1.
yeah, but I also want to look at it this way that I feel like as an architectural designer, we're still tied to Windows-based machines.
Hmm.
But you can expect, I bet your client is on Mac. Unfortunately.
Maybe,
So
honestly,
you don't need Revit if you're a client. So that's another thing. So as an architectural designer, I need to stay on Windows side for those reasons. But you can actually expect your client to be on the Mac side because majority of regular consumers, such as your client, is a lot of them, like frankly, too many of them are on Mac. So for something like if you were to do a render, you need to make sure, or if you produce a model, then you need to make sure that is viewable on Mac side. Now, on the Mac side, if you had not have adequate hardware, then you just simply cannot view those things.
yeah, and
Whereas,
that's the problem here, right? Is the hardware is never going to be adequate, and it doesn't seem like it's Apple hardware continually is really, really well optimized for what it is, but they don't support the kind of hardware needs that designers outside of graphic and web design need. 3D artists don't use Apple products anymore. I can almost guarantee maybe a very small handful of 3D artists use Apple products. Architects, on the whole, don't use Apple products because they're not well supported for architectural products. Even when you're using things like Archicad and Nemeshek software, you are kind of hamstrung because the rest of the architectural world is on Revit and Autodesk products, and they are PC only. And I'm not trying to split, the market
crowds.
from, I'm not doing the PC versus Mac thing. I'm just saying that if you're going to go Apple, you're going to be hamstrung and you're going to have to find workarounds. And if you're going to have to do all that, you might as well use something like Linux um, at
Timothy
that point.
here on the chat is saying Archicad is both on PC and Mac.
Yes, I was just looking for a parallel to
Yeah, but even just like
Revit.
AutoCAD, it does work on Mac. I did use that little bit on my student days, but I mean, it's just the Revit. The ancient APIs of Revit just probably cannot be written to in a complex way to jump the board.
No,
Is what I'm thinking, and they probably don't want to
I mean even
develop that.
SketchUp. I'm
SketchUp works
curious
on
to
Mac.
see if on the M1 chips.
Don't know. Isn't there some sort of like a compatibility mode on M1 where any
Yes, I don't
existing
know if it works
Mac
well.
compatible softwares still work? And that it probably had like, I don't know, like kind of like dumbed down performance, but I thought it actually worked. I'm actually curious to see.
Yes,
I would
I'll
love
have
to,
to
yeah,
try that.
if I don't have M1 machine, but I
I've got a friend
think.
with an M1 Mac. I'll have to see if I can borrow it.
Yeah, and even if it is not like something that I'm going to utilize, obviously, I don't think I will ever utilize M1 daily or any sort of subsequent M1 chips as a daily driver. But again, just like Unreal and Blender, it is a great piece of technology that
Yeah,
is going to help us in the long run and
I'm curious
also.
to see where it goes.
Right. And, because Apple has a huge support of developers, once Adobe makes the suitable software for all the M1 so that it's out of beta phase, then it is going to work for even when Windows jumps on board with a ARM-based chip, then the language is going to be similar. Is my sort of very lack of
Yeah,
understanding in terms of development and programming, but I feel like it is going to drive in terms of
well,
development and what we are able to use as an end user.
I would agree on all points.
Well,
So,
there are a few more things that I did want to talk about, but because we're kind of running late, I'm
hmm
going to try and wrap things up. Um, you know, I well, next week actually, I have a guest speaker who's willing to jump on board. Uh, Let me make sure I
ooh,
say his name correctly.
this is a surprise.
Yes. You see, I don't tell everything. I don't tell everything to Ted.
I never know what's going on. It's fine.
So, do you know Sketchup Masterclass?
Yes,
Do you
I'm
know the
familiar.
owner?
I don't.
His name is Matt. Matt Stephenson Donnelly. Donnelly, sorry. Um, his name is Matt. He's a great chap, for a British way to say. And he wrote a book on SketchUp, and also he's sort of an advocate for SketchUp. So I think I don't I it's been a while since I covered a content exclusive to SketchUp, just because I don't know, my head is all over the place. But I think it would be a good time to just kind of discuss about what he does
Yeah,
inside of SketchUp, and I think that will be sort of a three-way talk. Just us just kind of geeking out and talking about the industry and what he does and what we are able to just kind of think about, and yeah, it'll be just again sort of a casual talk.
yeah, that'd be great. I'm familiar with Matt Donnelly's work only in in passing. I think he's done some stuff with SketchUp.
I mean, he
Is that
does the
correct?
masterclass,
Yeah,
SketchUp Masterclass. So he runs a
but I mean,
channel.
like
He does
he
those.
well, I mean, I meant to say he's done like presentations at like base camp and
Oh yeah,
stuff, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that's where I think I'm familiar with him, most familiar with him. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I'm looking forward to uh, chatting it up.
Not Masterclass, sorry. Master SketchUp is what he runs.
Awesome.
MasterSketchup.com.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so we'll have a good talk. So I'll post that once we get things up. It'll be same time next week, Tuesday. It'll be 9 o'clock CST. So if anyone is able to join, I'd love to have a chat with you. Speaking of chats, we've got Jorge. Good to see you here, actually. I am familiar with who you are. Even if you use an architectural software on Mac, you can't move freely. For example, point cloud, virtual reality platforms definitely don't handle well on Mac. Yeah, so
Yeah,
additional hoops that you have to jump through. What Ted had mentioned, and I've been there, done
but
that,
they're such
and
pretty computers.
so okay, so before we kind of scatter off, I wanted to kind of ask you this when we were talking about. So when you enter an architectural office and the entire office is with iMac, would you continue forward or would you walk out?
I think I would, me personally, I'd probably have to walk out. I'm like, I can't use any of these.
I went in for a
Um,
job interview once and I saw Macs and I just didn't know what to make of it. Like I'm like, do I really want to work here?
Now, had you asked me that when I was in college, it'd be a different answer.
Right. It's so cool. But yet knowing the practices, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm up for all
So
of these additional
secretly,
things.
those offices all have PC suites in the back. They just don't see them.
Or have them installed. I don't know. But obviously I'm gonna have a bit more thoughts when I just see iMac lined up on their offices. It's
Yeah.
just such a weird thing. I was just a little bit puzzled when I saw that. But anyways, so are you able to join next week?
I don't see why not. I don't have any plans. I'm making room for you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we've got to make sure our kids are asleep and wife are talk to say okay on our gentleman talk. But yeah, if anyone are able to jump on, I'll see you next week. Ted, again, always pleasure to geek out and talk about things that I know, you know, and just have fun together. Thank you so much for everyone joining. I think I'll wrap it up and run the outro here, and I'll see you next week.
Have a good night.